I want to go back to 1974, in between the years of 1974 and 1978. And I just want to bring out a little history showing how we progressed to get where we are today. This didn't just happen overnight. So in between the years of 1973 and 1978, when a lot of the original members of Disciples, Vice Lords, and Stones, these guys were in jail. So the streets were like they are now. They were fractured. So during that time, a lot of neighborhood gangs started arising in all these different communities across the city. 16th and Lawndale, the area, the heart of the holy city, you had a group of brothers called Brothers Incorporated. Go over to Ridgeway, you had another group over there called RIPs, Ridgeway International Players. You had a group of brothers up at Farragut High School called FIGs, Farragut International Gangsters. You come over to Sawyer, be down on 1314 Sawyer, Christiana, you had another group over there called the Sawyer Destroyers. Right around Lawndale and Roosevelt, there was another group over there called the Mystery Knights. Down on Roosevelt and Troy, you had a group called the Troy T's. Now, anybody that's ever lived on the west side knows that you can take Douglas Boulevard and you could come to the south side. And a lot of times when we was leaving the west side, we came to the south side. I originally came from the west side in 1973. I came out south in that year, 1973. You take Douglas Boulevard, you can take that all the way 55th and go all the way straight into Hyde Park. So around 55th and Halsted, you had another group called TB, Together Brothers. Coming further south, 71st and Lafayette, that big white building right on the corner, you had the White Building Boys. Ida B. Wells, you had a group called the Mac City Gents. Going into the area that's called Terrortown, before it was called Terrortown, you had two groups over there. You had the Kingston Raiders and you had the Kingston Killers. So see, these are some of the groups that became part of the original groups in this time frame. So 1978 come around. Shorty Freeman is now the king of the Black Disciples. You had two groups out here as far as the disciples' name: Black Disciple, Black Gangster Disciple. And the reason I think that this part is so important, because a big war kicked off between the Black Disciples and the Gangster Disciples, and we still feeling the effect of it now, because even the new groups, even though they all in the clique, some of them still claiming that they BDs and the GDs. So the reason I thought this prelude was so important is for them to understand that it wasn't always like this. Now, even though that split took place in the 70s, most of the guys that became disciples in between 1978 and the early 80s, they didn't care nothing about that. They was just happy to be a part of the disciple family. And it was unified, even though you had the two groups. And what a lot of guys don't know is every week in the Black Gangster Disciple meetings, 4 names was mentioned. Matter of fact, we used to open up the meeting with a prayer. We had one person in the center of the circle and everybody else formed a circle around them, and they would recite the disciples' prayer and we would repeat after them. 4 names came up in the Black Gangster Disciple literature as far as the prayer, and that was King David, King Hoover, King Shorty, and Minister of Defense Don Durkee. So the Disciple Nation, even though you had them 2 different branches, and regardless of how Shorty Freeman became leader of the Black Disciples, that's neither here or there. It was done, and the Disciples Nation functioned in unity. Black disciples and Black Gangster Disciples. Now, as the years went on, let me take it back a little bit, just so people understand what was going on. The reason I keep saying Black Gangster Disciple, because the Gangster Disciple name was not Gangster Disciple, it was Black Gangster Disciple when I joined. When I joined, there were branches inside the Black Gangster Disciple Nation that was a part of the original groups from the 60s, and they carried over as branches inside the Black Gangster Disciple. That was High Supreme. You had High Supreme Gangster Disciples. You had Insane Gangster Disciples. You had Outlaw Gangster Disciples. When I say outlaw, I'm not talking about the group that rose up later on in Cabrini Green, that renegade group. I'm talking about the sanctioned Outlaw Gangster Disciple, 95th Street, Don US. You had Boss Pimps, you had Sircons, and you had Maniacs. A good friend of mine, Don Robb, from off 70th and Bell, was the Don of the Maniacs. So you had Black Gangster Disciple Nation, and the Black Disciple Nation, and you had them branches inside of it, and we was unified. If I had 100 guys with me, 1/3 of those guys were Black disciples. I was a High Supreme Gangster disciple. Some of my closest friends, guys like Mickey Bull from Henry Horner. You had Minister Ed from, Mickey Bull from Robert Taylor. Minister Ed was from the Horners. These guys were close to us, so wasn't no BD, GDs killing each other back then. Every now and then you might have had some guys that had a little rift between each other, but it wasn't no nation thing, BDs and GDs killing each other. 1984 come around. We get word from the Don that the old man was breaking up all the branches inside the Black Gangster Disciple Nation. It's just GDN. Ain't no more Insanes, High Supremes. And make no mistake, I want y'all to understand, when we say High Supreme, it was, by then, it was High Supreme Gangster Disciple. High Supreme and Supreme Gangsters is two different things. The Supreme Gangsters was the father of the Gangster Nation. High Supreme was a branch of the Supreme Gangsters. And after 69, everything had a D on it. So we was High Supreme Gangster Disciples up until 1984. When 84 came around, it was just Gangster Disciple Nation. This is when you start hearing guys saying GD. Nah, it was still unified. It was still much love between the Black disciples and the Gangster disciples. 1987 comes around. Ronald Reagan is president. We had a standoff with the Soviet Union. You had all this stuff going on. Now we got a new drug in our community. Now in the 70s, it was heroin, teas and blues. You had yellow jackets, black beauties, syrup and a bean. Now we got Ready Rock. When the Rocks came on the scene, that's when you start really seeing the rift and unity between the Black disciples and the Gangster disciples, because now it was about territory and people defending an area about who's intruding on somebody's area as far as getting money. As the years went on, Shorty Freeman stepped down as the leader of the Black disciples. We got a new Black disciple leader now. To further the tensions, this is going into the 90s, coming into 2000. This is in the 90s going into 2000. You had a group within the Black disciples that was known as Blue Fins. One of them was a good friend of mine, and I didn't know what that meant. One day we was having a conversation, and he was telling me that he was a Black disciple, but he said that they wear their hats to the left, and they was under a blue 5-point star. So I had never heard of that. He was telling me, you know, the Stones and us, we first cousins. I've been gone since 84. I left the streets in 1984, but I still had good friends that were still out there. So that was another thing in and of itself. So one day I was over on 69th and Halsted. Now that was Black disciple area. I was going over there to see an old friend that was a Black disciple. We see a young boy walking down the street. He got his hat to the left and he throwing the pitchforks down. So I asked him, I say, what, they Vice Lords or Stones over? He said, no, them the Blue Fins. So now you see there was a progression that led up to where we are today. So going into the 90s, by the 90s, they was out there killing each other. It was like two different nations then. Going in the 2000s, that's when all the guys, the United States government was going from mob to mob, chopping all the mobs down, taking the leaders off of the street. Now you got a group of brothers out here with no leadership. That was in every mob. So now you had people on the street forming their own organizations. And even before that, if we go back into the 90s, even inside the Gangster disciples, you had guys that was breaking away because of various reasons. Some of them was renegades, and some of them because they was upset with the leadership, different things they said, people abusing their authority. So you had guys doing renegade things then, but by the time 2000 came, all that stuff was just totally dismantled. So you have now a group of young men that's coming up with no real leadership and no direction. They form their own little groups. Then they start bringing in guys they were considered rivals at one time, and they became these little groups that they have today. And the reason I thought that was so important is because things are not the way they always started to be. And a lot of people don't know that. You got some guys out here, they don't know the history of the Black disciples or the Gangster disciples, even some of the older guys. And you got people out here feeding these guys misinformation. Now, when I was coming up, history wasn't a big thing. History wasn't as important as knowing your literature. People wanted to know their laws, because if you was wearing a 6-point star, which you saw everywhere, and back in them days, you knew what neighborhood you was. You don't see it now, but back then, disciples was everywhere. You saw it all over the wall, 6-point star, BGDN, BDN with the pitchforks. The older Black disciples were under the pitchforks because the pitchforks was a disciple symbol. until the gangsters merged in 69. But you knew where you was then. Now it's just different cliques in different neighborhoods from block to block. So I feel that my generation and the generation before that, I feel like we owe you young brothers and sisters, and not only y'all, but the black community, an apology for perpetuating this idea when we were young that another black man was your enemy and your opposition. These are your brothers and sisters, no matter what they are, whether they call themselves Vice Lords, Mickey Cobras, whatever cliques y'all got going on out there. These are all your brothers. And what we need you brothers to do is to come together and protect the neighborhood. We got people coming in our communities, kidnapping our girls. We got people coming over there doing shootings and blaming it on brothers. Y'all know that. We need you to stop turning your guns on each other. And again, I want to say from the bottom of my heart to the black community, I want to apologize for my role as a young person for keeping that idea going back when we was young, that another black man was our opposition and an enemy. I got a brother that just passed away about a week ago. I missed his funeral. Now, back in the day, me and this brother, we was trying to kill each other for 10 years. Next time I saw the guy, he was in church, he was a minister, and I was a minister. This guy became like my brother. And make no mistake, we done had some runs with each other. Matter of fact, he stabbed me, cut 2 of my arteries back in the day. My arm is still numb to this day. But 10 years later, we was able to put that behind us because we understood that that's what came along with the lifestyle we was living. So this brother became like a brother to me. His brother name, we used to call him Karate Kevin. He was one of the leaders of the Mickey Cobras. So I just want to let you brothers know you can't reconcile that. That comes along with the territory. The stabbing, the shooting, you live that lifestyle that comes along with it, but we don't have to keep that going. And to some of the older brothers, you need to tell these guys the truth, because there's some of you all out there that's feeding all this negativity to this brother, talking about how it was when you was out there, and you making these stories sound glorious. We can't glorify the past, and we got to tell the truth. Maybe in the beginning, it started off as organizations protecting the communities, because when blacks was coming from the South, they was moving in white communities up in Chicago, up here in the North. But as the whites moved out, we started fighting each other. So let's just tell the truth. This may have started off about family and community, but it turned into a street gang. I can't say that when I came in, it was about family, because it wasn't. It was about gang banging, and we was destroying our own community. So again, I just want to let y'all know, since that time, I've been a correctional counselor. I worked in a group home. I've had some of the best jobs in the world. But I just want to let you brothers know there's a life outside of the community. And until you all come together, put your differences to the side, what you're doing is laying a foundation for your children to walk into. Now, some of y'all that's out here doing this killing, when you go to the penitentiary, ain't nobody out here to protect your daughter, your little sister, your baby, your sons, none of that. You leaving them out here at the mercy of the world. And like they used to tell us when I was younger, what goes around comes around. When you go to the joint and somebody else decide to kill somebody, it might be your daughter standing out there to get caught up. It might be your mama, and you can't do nothing about it because you're not here to protect them. So you got to think about them seeds you planting, because the seeds you plant, they might come back as weeds, and they'll come up and they'll choke your family as well.